Welcome to the first episode of Collectibles Chaos. I am Andrew Sigerson, a longtime collector, longtime meaning 40 years of collecting, and my interests are diverse. And what I thought would be interesting is to start a podcast where we talk about the different kinds of collectibles, some of the history behind those collectibles, where those collectibles came from, how those collectibles get popular, or in, like, say, for instance, the card space, how those items that end up in packs, how they get acquired, how are they, when you see that someone has a cut signature, for instance, or presidential autos, or, where are those from? How are people getting those things? Or maybe some of the creative forces behind some of the things we've seen in the hobby, in the different parts of the hobbies that people collect. But here's the thing. I collect so many different things, and I've yet to run into a podcast that really covers a lot of that really well. There's lots of podcasts on cards, right? There's lots of podcasts on those kinds of things, but there isn't a lot of podcasts that might dive into, say, vinyl records, or maybe dive into movie posters, or maybe dive into historical documents, or toys. There's just so many interesting, fascinating collectibles out there that I thought it would be a fun journey to really dive into a lot of these various things. And at the same time, we can cover sort of what the market looks like, what are the best auction houses, or what auction houses specialize in certain things. So if you're looking to buy something where you might find that more normally than you might find it somewhere else, maybe some of the smaller auction houses you didn't even know existed, where you might get a pretty good deal on something that if it made its way to the bigger auction houses, you wouldn't get as good a deal because there'd be so many more people eyes on it. And then just, what are these different collectibles? When you see a document signed by Abraham Lincoln, for instance, when was that document? What's the history behind it? What kind of things were happening in history when that might have been signed, assuming it's not a cut, maybe it's a document. And just all these kinds of things out there. There's so many interesting things out there, so many subsets of collectibles and categories. And I just don't think there's a great resource right now that kind of dives into those various things. Now, there's a lot of great podcasts, and every once in a while they'll go off on tangents and they'll do something like vinyl records or something and talk about it. But, really, is there a place where you can get all of that on a regular basis and not just cards, right? I mean, I collect cards. I love cards. I've been collecting cards for a long time. So I enjoy talking about them. Don't get me wrong, but there's lots of resources that are doing that. But when you see, somebody pull a John Hancock out of a product, it's interesting to say, whoa, where did that come from? How did they find that? How the heck, why did they cut it? Or was it already cut? Or you think about some of the interesting collectibles inside of card products that are interesting. Like, do you remember the bug cards that Upper Deck made a long time ago? Or what about these game used bat cards? Are they really game used? How do we know the provenance? We're going to talk to people that own auction houses. We're going to talk to the creators in the hobby that have come up with the different kinds of things that have been done in the collectible space. We're going to talk to grading companies that are starting to come on the scene that might be doing things like records, movie posters, things like that. We're going to try and dig into the auction houses and really talk to some of those folks on how do they get this stuff? What is their methods? Where are they finding people that have these things? How do they advertise, Why do we keep finding here and there some kind of these diamonds in the rough, or people find things behind walls, or they find things in the attic and they don't throw them away. They somehow remember, geez, we better check this out. And we'll really get into the industry and see, hey, if you want to build a collection in a different space than, say, cards, for instance, how would you do that? If you were going to start to build a presidential auto set, how would you do it? There's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of interesting collecting philosophies that go around those kinds of things. And, I've been down that path. I know a lot of folks that do those kinds of things. And you have collectors that have massively valuable collections, and you have collectors that have beautiful collections that aren't necessarily that valuable. And there's just so many things out there that we can look at. Now, this isn't meant to be necessarily a dive into the really, really high-end stuff. So I'm it's not that we'll never do a story on art. But that's not really the audience we're talking to. We're not talking to the folks that are buying $25 million paintings. That's a different world that that most of us, if not almost all of us, are never going to live in. So let's not spend a lot of time there. And we're probably not going to get into, $1 million vehicles. We might mention one here and there if something unusual happens. If they sell a James Bond car, that may be something to think about and look at. But it's not something that most of us, or really any of us, can probably afford. And the folks that can afford it are not listening to podcasts like this. But we'll try to get into some things that are interesting. And so our first episode is going to come out after this introductory episode. And we're going to tackle something kind of modern day. So you'll see that. That'll be released about the same time as this video. So, and we're going to do that here very shortly because we want that to get out here, get that audience, or get that podcast into the public stream so they can see it before an important historical event takes place very soon. So I look forward to doing that. Again, I'm Andrew Sigerson. I've been a collector for about 45 years. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I've been collecting most of my adult life. I'm an attorney by practice. We do estate planning, so I work with a lot of folks when it comes to how do they distribute their assets when they're gone, and how do they take care of their families. And we work with a lot of wealthy individuals, but also a lot of folks that are just normal, that just trying to make sure if something happens, their kids are taken care of. So, but we have a large practice in Nebraska. We cover about 15 states, and I've been attending the National Sports Collectors Convention for about 10 years. I tend to set up at that convention, and that's the only show I ever set up as. And my goal in that show is just to attract other collectors that find interest in some of the things I collect, and we can talk about what they have, and they may want to see what I have, and sometimes that's a chance for us to share stories and maybe upgrade our collections based on what our different goals and philosophies are. So that's a lot of fun. So if you go to the National, I'm always there, and look forward to connecting with you if you ever want to talk about these things. But that's the goal of this show. I do have 4 kids. 3 of those kids really don't have a lot of interest in collectibles. 1, sometimes 2, do to some degree. Have some interest in it, but I don't think they really appreciate what is there, if you know what I'm talking about. So, and we'll also take some dives down, what if I want to insure my collection? How do I do that? And what happens when I'm gone? What do I do with this thing? What kind of instructions do I leave? How do I liquidate this thing? Am I leaving my family a mess? That is a huge issue. If you've been collecting comic books or cards or anything where there's a volume to it, I mean, when you're gone, what the heck is going to happen to this stuff? You don't want them just throwing it in the garbage can. You want to leave them some kind of instructions, or you want to leave them some direction on what you're going to do with those things. So we'll cover that stuff as well. But that's what the goal of this podcast is, and we'll try and be consistent in sending out episodes and talking to important people in the hobby and diving into some of the really interesting collectibles that have been out there and been done. And we'll likely start with some historic podcast, a historical one. That's the one I was talking about earlier that's going to drop here soon. And then we'll go on from there, and we'll have guests, and we'll have fun, and we'll take questions, and we'll do all kinds of things that I think will be interesting to the collecting community. So if you ever decide you want to collect things other than cards, this is a great podcast to listen to, because we're going to talk about a lot of those things. But occasionally we will talk about cards. And that'll be interesting as well. So I look forward to this journey with you. I can't wait, because I love this stuff. I'm doing this podcast because I just love talking about this stuff. I'm not here to try and make money on it. I'm not trying to, become the most important hobby influencer out there. I'm not trying to do breaking news. I just want to enjoy these collectibles and share some of the stories behind them, and give tips to folks that may want to get into divergent and diverse areas in collecting. So thanks for joining me. Really excited about this, and more episodes to come. Thanks.